legal now.
Can dance.
Thank you so much for being with us. It is 12:30 on Tuesday, and that means it's time for Behind the Book with your host, Hawk Koch. Come on over to Zoom where Freda and Hawk are waiting for us.
Thank you, Jen. Welcome, Hawk. Always good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks. I'm very excited to hear Paul. I come from a family of editors. My son, who is currently an editor, is on the call with his posse of editor friends. So we are really looking forward to this and hear his stories. And thank you always, Hawk, for being here and making this hour and a half very exciting.
Well, thank you, and welcome everybody. I've missed you a couple of weeks, and we're back. We've got a couple of huge shows coming up in the next month, which we'll tell you about later. But meanwhile, today I get to talk to an editing legend, Paul Hirsch. Paul edited some of the most successful films in movie history: Carrie, Ferris, Bueller, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Steel Magnolias. The Empire Strikes Back, and he won an Oscar for the original Star Wars. Yep, he was an editor on the original Star Wars. He worked with Brian De Palma 11 times. Talk about loyalty. George Lucas twice, Herb Ross many times, John Hughes twice, J.J. Abrams and Brad Bird, just to name a few. He has written a book about his life's work a long time ago in an editing room far, far away. But he's with us, not far away. He's right here with us now. Paul, please come in and say hi.
Hi.
Hey, there's Paul. There he is. Hi, buddy.
Slight correction. It's in a cutting room far, far away.
Oh, Jesus. I blew it already.
I'm an editor. What can I say? You know?
Yeah. Not only, I was lucky enough to work with Paul twice. Once he knew me, the other one I don't think he did. We did a movie called Source Code together about 10 years ago. And when I was president of Raystar, he was editing for Herb Ross on a movie that was very successful for us called The Secret of My Success. So welcome, Paul. And how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Well, you look good.
Hawk, did you know that Secret of My Success was #1 at the box office for 5 weeks in a row?
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore.
No.
It did $96 million in 1986, which is today an equivalent of over $200 million.
Wow.
For a comedy.
Yeah.
For a comedy that was supposed to star Matthew Broderick, but he pulled out at the last minute, and that's how, did you know that we brought in Michael J. Fox?
I don't think I did know that.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. Editor, you get on a little late. So first of all, let me ask you, aside from being a great singer, he has great show tunes, and we might get to that a little later. You're an editor. You've been doing this your whole life. Why did you write a book?
Well, the idea came from, as you know, Hawk, when we were on Source Code, you and I had a great time swapping stories. And I was on location in Vancouver in 1999, and Jane was back in Los Angeles. So on the weekend,
Jane's his wife. Sorry, lovely Jane.
Yeah. And on the weekend, I was alone and bored and lonely, and I thought, what am I going to do? And so I had been telling these stories on the set, and I thought, I should really write some of these stories down because they're pretty good stories. And so that's how it started. And I wrote. I don't think I really thought of it as a book just quite yet, but I guess I must have, because one of the smartest things I did was, at that time, this is 20 years ago now, I made an outline of things I would write about, stories. These are all sort of anecdotes about things that had happened to me, because I'd worked with some extraordinary people and I'd worked on some extraordinary films. And I thought, so, I should talk about my experiences on these pictures. And So I made an outline for myself, and I worked on the book for 18 years. And, and I would refer back to this outline. And then, of course, during those ensuing 18 years, I kept adding to the outline because I was doing more pictures and having more experiences. So, but if I hadn't made that outline, I doubt that, starting today, I would remember half of what I wrote. It's a diminishing capacity.
Well, it's so interesting for all of you out there who are in the business or around the business. Write down your outline. Same thing happened to me because I took a drive with Molly, my wife, and a 10-hour drive up to Oregon. I had written down every movie I'd worked on, and she would prompt me, and I'd tell stories into a tape recorder, and that's how my book starts going. So it's the same thing. So all of you out there who worked in the business and think, well, I couldn't write a book. Maybe you could, because I'm sure your stories are as good, well, maybe as good as Paul's and mine. I don't know. We'll see. Paul,
Yeah.
you've always been, aside from a craftsman, you've always been an artist. Can you give us a little background on your upbringing and how art played a role in your life?
Yeah, well, my father was a painter, and my mother was a dancer.
He wasn't a house painter. He wasn't white walls, right?
His work is in the permanent collections of museums all over the country, including
Wow.
the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Phillips Gallery in Washington, and museums all over the country. And so anyway, when I was growing up in New York, there were 3 or 4 specialized high schools, public high schools, that you had to take a test to get into. And one is Bronx High School of Science, which is famous for turning out Nobel Prize winners in science. And there's Brooklyn Tech it was called, and Stuyvesant. And the 4th one was High School of Music and Art. And that's where I went. And I think I was influenced in that by the fact that my brother had gone there, and my mother was sort of pushing me to go there. So I didn't have any particular talent, so I took drum lessons. I had a good sense of rhythm, so I took lessons, and I barely learned how to read music. I mean, just got in by the skin of my teeth. And anyway, so it turned out to be a fabulous experience. I majored in music. I learned a lot about music, and it's really kind of my first love.
Well,
But
then, okay, go ahead.
yeah, so
I was going to ask, so you went on to college, and then for some reason you were going to go to architecture school.
well, here's the thing. When I got to college, I thought I had some notion of being pre-med, but when I got into the science classes in college, I realized I had terrible preparation, woeful preparation for a science major. So I had to rethink my plans, and I took a course with a fantastic art history teacher who made the subject so exciting, and I became an art history major. And when it came time to graduate, I decided I wanted to apply to architecture school as a postgraduate course. The problem was that the architecture school was giving another bachelor's degree, so I would have had to go for another 4 years just to get a second bachelor's degree, which I already had one. So that didn't really work out. But in getting my first bachelor's degree, I didn't have quite enough points to graduate in time with my class, due to having flunked calculus in my freshman year.
Oh, thank God, you're another paisan like me.
So I got into a summer program to make up the credits before architecture school started in the fall, and that program happened to be in Paris. Now, I had lived in Paris as a child with my parents, and I think my love for movies really started in Paris because as an American child speaking English at home and French at school, I would go to see American movies. And it was sort of my link back to my home country, back to the States.
And they showed a lot of,
And
they
I remember seeing,
they loved the auteur, all the directors, I remember.
yeah, when I was a kid, I didn't know anything about that, but so I went to see An American in Paris about a dozen times because Gene Kelly played a painter in Paris, and he was married. He was in love with a dancer, and my mother was a dancer, and my father was a painter. So I was the American in Paris, So I saw that about 20 times, and then I remember also I was captivated by King Solomon's Mines. That picture really had a powerful hold on my imagination. I think part of it was the location shooting. I think there was a lot of stuff filmed actually in Africa. I don't know if it was all second unit or just partially
A
second.
lot of it. Bumi Martin was the director of the second unit on that.
And then, of course, the soundtrack is all African drums. There's no composed. There's no Hollywood.
But you had a revelation when you went to see Citizen Kane, I understand.
Yeah. So then, when I was in Paris making up this summer program, I started walking around, and we had half the day free to ourselves. And I'd go around the left bank, and I'd see marquees, and they would have the director's name on the marquee, and I'd never seen that before. And it would say Raoul Walsh Film Festival, and I thought, who's Raoul Walsh? And it would say Howard Hawks Film Festival, and I'd say, Howard Hawks, that sounds familiar, but I don't know who he is. And then I started going to see all these Hollywood movies from the 40s and 30s, and they were presented as works of art. And then they had this Wells Festival at the Cinematheque, and I went to see, on Monday, they were starting off with Citizen Kane, and I had heard the title, but that's all I knew about the picture, just the title. So I went to see it, and the auditorium was packed with French people. There were no subtitles, no French subtitles on the picture. They were seeing the original version. I'm sure they didn't speak French, but they went to speak English, but they went to see the staging and the lighting and the photography and the editing and the music. And they're real passionate cinephiles. And seeing the picture in that and knowing nothing about it and seeing it in that environment just hit me like a thunderbolt. It was fantastic. And I went back the next night, Tuesday night, I saw
Ambersons?
Magnificent Ambersons. Wednesday night, I saw Lady from Shanghai. Thursday night, I saw Touch of Evil. And Friday night, they were showing Othello, and Wells himself was coming, and you couldn't get near the place. I couldn't get in. So anyway, I saw those 4 films. I went back to New York and started architecture school, and I realized very quickly that this was not for me.
Right.
At the same time,
Do you ever drive down into Venice and see that same place where Wells did Touch of Evil? Every time I'm there, I got to stop and walk around. That opening shot of Touch of Evil is amazing.
Oh yeah, every time I go to the airport, I drive through there.
Yeah. So you finished, you forgot architecture school, and you got a job, I understand, delivering negatives somewhere.
Right, I was a gopher for an industrial film company that was making little films about racetrack. Today it would be called NASCAR. I don't think it was called NASCAR at the time. They were stock car races, and they'd shoot them, and then they cut them together for like a 20-minute film, and then put a tag on the end for STP or spark plug, Delco spark plugs, or tires, whatever. And these companies would show them at their sales conventions to get their salespeople excited. So while I was doing that, I met a negative cutter who was looking to train somebody. So I left my gopher job, went to train with this negative cutter. I learned the whole technical end of the business in terms of how you prepare negative for printing and why you have to lose frames and all this stuff. That's all obsolete now, but it was important then. And after about 6 months, I'd learned everything I could, including how to thread up a moviola from this guy I was working for, who was a screamer. And I just did not enjoy working for this man. So I left, and I happened to get a job as an assistant editor at a trailer house. And they were cutting trailers for MGM and United Artists. And they had started as a radio spot company, and they were expanding into TV spots and trailers. And they had hired an editor, and he needed help. So I went to work for him, and his name was Chuck Workman. And Chuck
turned out to be one of the greatest of ilk at the Academy Awards for years and years.
Yeah, he became famous.
Precious Images, yeah, right.
He became famous for his quick cut style.
Right.
So I learned how to cut trailers from Chuck. I mean, after a couple of weeks, I was cutting trailers there, and then my brother had coincidentally also named Chuck, was working at Universal Pictures as a junior executive, and he had met Brian De Palma, and they had proposed a project to the studio, and the studio turned them down. So my brother had a 2-week vacation from his job, and during that 2 weeks, he had raised some independent money and shot a film that Brian directed called Greetings, about 3 young guys who were trying to get out of the draft. And one of the 3 guys was Bob De Niro. And they needed a trailer for Greetings. And so they came to me. I cut the trailer and met Brian, and he and I just sort of clicked. And shortly after that,
let me ask you a question.
So,
I've always found that luck and timing are probably as important as talent.
Yeah.
You believe this is true? And is this one of those example of an experience that had you not done what you did and been there at the right time, you might never have met Brian?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you start at the end and you trace it back, everything seems predetermined, but going as you live it, it's all sort of happenstance.
Right.
So I remember being in a cab with a New York cab driver when I was about in my teens, and he said to me, "There's 3 ingredients to success: brains, guts, and luck." And I think he was right in a sense, because brains covers ability, whatever the ability is, not necessarily intellect, but and guts is the nerve, the confidence to be able to step up to the moment when the opportunity presents itself. So I think he was right, So
and luck.
And luck, yeah, of course, luck is the crucial ingredient.
Yeah.
And I've always been very lucky in my career. I've led a charmed life.
Yeah, I understand. On my first movie, the first AD quit on day 1 of shooting, and the second AD became the first. And we were in something, Mississippi, and they said, "Well, he knows what he's doing. You're the second AD." So had that not happened, I might not have gotten to where I got. So I understand that, and I think that for all those young people out there saying, you got to have the brains, you got to have the guts, and you got to have the luck. So you kept working with.
They got the money to do a sequel, and it was entitled "Son of Greetings," and so I was hired to be the editor on that. I left my job at the trailer house and became a freelance editor, and we did the picture, and I went into it with the confidence of ignorance. I was 23 years old, and cut a feature. Yeah, I can do that. No problem. And I learned some important lesson, a very important lesson in that picture, which is that even if you cut every scene perfectly, it doesn't mean that the whole picture is perfect. There's a difference between the scenes and the picture, So
that was Gordon Willis taught me from cinematography the same kind of thing, where Gordy, more than any cinematographer I ever worked with, 2 weeks before shooting, worked with the director and the AD and the editor, actually. And we sat down and talked about to the director, how do you see scene 1? Wide, tight, moving, stationary. How do you see the transition from scene 1 to scene 2? So we had a whole playbook in front of us before we ever got there. And just because the scene was good didn't mean the whole movie was good. But Gordy could see the whole movie before we ever started shooting. He knew what that whole movie was going to look like. And I'll bet you did the same thing as an editor.
Not in the least.
Well, tell me now, did you,
It's a process, you know.
yes, but did you ever, now you've worked on a lot of movies.
Yes.
Were you ever on a movie where you went, wow, this is going to be great, and then it bombed, or
Yes.
one that you thought was a piece of shit and it became a big success? What are some of those movies?
Well, the one that I thought was really great and turned out to have problems was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It was the second picture I did with John Hughes. And we'd had a great success with Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I was at the mix. John wasn't very interested in post-production sound and mixing and all that, and looping, and he wasn't interested in that stuff. So he sort of left all that stuff to me on Ferris. So I was looping the actors and mixing the picture. And I called John. I said, look, John, you got to come to the mix. He says, burn the negative. I said, come on, you know, you got to sign off on some of these reels. He said, I'm busy. I said, John, you got to come in and listen to the reels. So he came in the next day and he handed me an envelope with 60 pages in it. He said, read this. I wrote it last night. And he could actually do that. He would sit down and he could write as fast as he could type. And he could type about 10 pages an hour, and he wrote for 6 hours, and he turned out 60 pages. And those 60 pages were the first 60 pages of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Wow.
It just poured out of him. So anyway, I agreed to do the picture, and I thought it was just so funny, you know, and started working on the film, and the whole, I mean, we could talk for an hour and a half about the editing of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, because that was a whole adventure. But the first cut was 3 hours and 45 minutes, the longest cut I've ever had on a picture. And we watched 12 reels, broke and had a sandwich, and then watched the next 12 reels. And John turned to me, he says, it's too long. I thought, no kidding, you know. So we started to cut the picture down. We worked, and we were under tremendous time pressure because the picture finished shooting June 30th. There was a threatened director's strike that year, and they had to finish shooting before June 30th. Otherwise, we were in trouble. So they did. They managed to finish shooting June 30th. They shot 85 days on a comedy. 85 days.
Ooh.
And they were shooting, I was looking at 3 hours of dailies a day.
Oh my God.
And this is on film. So, and John never yelled cut. So when they were shooting a close-up, they would get to the end, he said, okay, pick it up again from, you know.
Oh God.
So I'd be faced with, and then at the end, they would say, run out, reload, you know, and I was faced with 1,000-foot takes of a close-up looking for line readings. And there could be 3 or 4 line readings of the same line in that 1,000 feet, but who knows where, you know? So we hired extra editors, and anyway, we worked like mad, and we had this screening, this 3 hour and 45-minute screening, and then we started cutting the picture down. We worked, we were booked.
Sorry to interrupt, but all this time, were you thinking there's a great movie in there, or oh God, is this horrible?
Well, I didn't have a chance to think about it just yet. So I'm getting to that. So
Okay.
Anyway, so I guess I'm a little long-winded, but we have time, right?
Yes, we're okay.
Okay, so the picture was going to open in, I don't know, thousands of theaters November 9th and play through Thanksgiving as a Thanksgiving themed film. So we were already booked, and so that means we had to mix in October, right? So that means we're working now, it's Labor Day, and we're having our first preview. And by this time, we had cut out an hour and 45 minutes. We were down to 2 hours. And I thought, at this point, I thought, this is the funniest movie ever made. This is fantastic. We're going to blow them away. And we went into that screening, and people started walking out. And about 20 people walked out, and I was crushed. I've never recovered. I've never gone into a preview ever since in confidence, because I was so confident in the picture at that point. I just never expected that kind of reaction. So in answer to your question.
Yes.
So, and then we had 9 previews during the month of September. Think about that. That's 2 a week on film. We were turning it around, a new version every twice a week, and with a new mix. You know. So anyway, after 4 screenings, we figured out what the problem was, and the main problem was, and then it hinged on a very small, like a detail. We'd taken out one line of dialogue, we put it back, and it fixed everything. And I write about it in the book.
Wow.
But and then eventually we got it down to the final film ran 90 minutes, so we cut out more than we left in. But there's some great, really funny stuff in that.
Well, it was a big hit movie.
Yes, but we didn't win the weekend though, and that was a big disappointment too.
Who won the weekend? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was 3 Men and a Baby. Which, you know,
and not too dissimilar as far as another comedy.
Yeah.
Just not as crazy as Candy and Steve Martin. Yeah.
Well,
so let's go back again.
Planes, Trains, and Automobiles has sort of turned out to be a classic because it plays every year in a lot of places.
Yeah.
I don't hear that about 3 Men and a Baby.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Although they did do sequels to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back now. Now you're working with Brian De Palma, and obviously he feels pretty good about you, and you feel pretty good about him. And you keep making these smaller movies, and then all of a sudden you get a script from a book that was the first novel by a guy named Stephen King.
Yes. Yeah. So Brian and I had done 4 films. Hi Mom, Sisters, Phantom of the Paradise, and Obsession. Obsession was filmed by, the cinematographer was Vilmos Zsigmond. It's the most beautiful picture.
Yeah, I worked twice with Willie. Beautiful.
It was by Bernard Herrmann.
Yes.
Second picture together, and that was an experience. I write about him in the book. He was.
For those of you who don't know, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Close Encounters, just to name a couple that Willie did.
Yeah. And Heaven's Gate.
Heaven's Gate, yes.
Stunning. But yeah, I mean the picture, but look at the images in that film. They're just astounding.
When you have 200 days, you know, or something.
But the pictures are glorious. I mean, it took all day to get a single setup, you know, but that setup was astounding, you know.
Yes, I understand, but somebody has to be responsible every once in a while.
You're thinking like a producer, but I'm thinking as a you know, a film lover. You have to love the images, you know.
Yeah.
And be grateful that.
Well, as a producer, we also lost a company to help finance movies because of Heaven's Gate. So anyway, let's go back to Brian De Palma here.
You can't win them all. So Brian came, you know, sent me. He says, "What's the next picture I'm doing is called Carrie," and I read the book, and you know, in the book she's described much differently than Sissy Spacek looks. In the book, she's described as sort of homely and pimply, I think, and you're sort of, you know, the kind of kid that gets picked on in high school, and it had this, you know, the fantasy aspect to it, the telekinesis, and this was right around the time that the Exorcist had come out, and I thought this sounds like sort of a knockoff of The Exorcist, and you know, I had just done this glorious film with Vilmos Zsigmond that was, you know, romantic mystery, and I thought that you know, Carrie was sort of step backward in a way of sort of going back to the horror genre that we had done earlier. I thought we were progressing in a way to make more and more high-tone movies, but boy, was I wrong, because Carrie turned out to be absolutely great. And years later, many years later, I worked with Baz Luhrmann on The Great Gatsby for a while. I came in and helped out for a little while. And one of the things that Baz said to me that stuck with me, he says, the best that we can hope for in the business is that the pictures that we work on become part of the culture. And Carrie has certainly done that. Everybody knows it. It's just
Sure. Yeah.
everybody knows.
So when did you know in the cutting process or reading the script or when did you know how the audience was going to connect with Carrie? When did that feeling get to you, or did you not know until it came out?
Well, when we previewed the picture, we didn't preview the picture in those days in New York. Brian would invite friends to watch the film who were savvy about filmmaking but knew nothing about the project. And it was a good, useful technique because they were able to make good suggestions. Anyway, we used to screen the film in the MGM screening room in New York. And that room had hinged seats and the backs were sprung. So you could lean back in your seat, And Brian and I were sitting in the last row. And when there's that jump scare at the end, when the hand comes shooting out of the grave, every seat in the theater went back like this. And we used to sit and laugh. And that's when I sort of knew that we had a possibly good picture on our hands.
Now, was that before or after the hand coming up out of the lake in Deliverance?
That was after. Brian and I saw Deliverance together. And when that hand came up out of the lake, we came out of the theater and Brian said, he says, great ending. He says, but I could do it better.
Wow.
He said, I know I could do it better.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. So, all right. So you do that movie with him. You're
Right.
still in New York, but people are getting to know who Paul Hirsch is. And
Right. So
how'd you get involved? How'd you get involved with Star Wars?
Okay, so going back a little, rewind. When I'm working on Phantom of the Paradise, there was a screening in California at Fox in the little theater. And Brian called me in New York. He said, Phantom was an independent production that had been picked up by Fox for distribution. And it was, I think, was the biggest figure ever paid for an independent negative pickup at that time. And Brian called me. He says, the excitement out here is tremendous. You got to get out here. He says, we're having a screening. And Jane and I got in the plane. We flew out. We went to the screening. And afterwards, there was a little party. And there were numbers of people there. And this woman came up to me. She said, yeah, are you the editor? And I said, yes. She says, hi, I'm Marsha Lucas. And my husband wants to meet you. And she said some nice complimentary things. And Marsha had cut American Graffiti.
American Graffiti, yeah.
And I think she had done Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore by then also. I'm not exactly sure on that. But anyway, she took me to meet George, and that's when we met. So that was on Phantom. And then I went on and did Obsession with Brian, and we had our own, there's some problems with Obsession because there was a plot development in it that all the studios found objectionable, and they turned the picture down. And I came up with a way to change one shot in the film. We substituted one shot, and the film that everyone had rejected was then picked up by Columbia Pictures. But the details of that will be in the book also. Anyway, George was at that point planning, he was in pre-production for Star Wars, and Brian was in pre-production for Carrie, and they were both looking for actors the same age. So they were looking at young people for Luke Skywalker or for
Princess Leia.
Yeah, and and Brian was casting Carrie, which is all high school kids. So they're all looking at actors the same age. So they had their casting sessions together. So during one of these sessions, I got a phone call from Brian. He says, "Here, George wants to talk to you." And he put George on the phone, and I had this image of Brian with his arm around George's neck, dragging him to the phone. Because Brian was very outgoing, and he's a very extroverted, could be very extroverted. You know, he got more private over the years, but at that point he was very outgoing and gregarious, and George was more reserved. But anyway, George told me, he says, "I really like your work, and I'd like to work with you someday." And I thought, well, that's great, you know, but I wish it were sooner rather than later, because I thought American Graffiti was a fantastic picture. And I've seen it again recently, and I still think it's a fantastic
Yeah,
picture.
it still holds up. I agree.
Yeah. So then, you know, he went off to England to shoot Star Wars, and I started working on Carrie. And while that spring, I visited the home of a mutual friend of ours, a guy named Jay Cox. Jay he's a screenwriter and
Married to Werner Bloom. Yeah, I did a movie with Werner. Yeah.
Yeah. And he had been over to England visiting the production, and had come back with a book of production stills from Star Wars. And I was looking through this book of production stills, and I saw the Jawas and the Sandcrawler and the Wookiee and the stormtroopers and Darth Vader and all these images, and 3PO and R2. And I thought, oh my God, I wish I could work in this movie. It looks so exciting. And just the title of it was exciting, Star Wars. You know, all the space movies up to that point had always been the moon or Mars or someplace in the solar system. Even, you know, 2001 was going to Jupiter, you know, but this was Star Wars. It was like much further away. It was very exciting to me. Anyway, I went home that night. I said to Jane, I said, you know, it's nice that George wants to work with me, but I wish it could have been this one. So anyway, at the end of principal photography in England, George and Marsha came back through New York on the way back to California, and we screened Carrie for them. It was pretty much done at that point. And a little while later, a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call from Marsha saying, "We need help meeting our deadline because we have to recut the whole picture." They were unhappy with the first cut that had been done in England. And they said, "We're recutting the picture from the top. We need help. Can you come help out?" And so I did.
So you moved to LA or to Northern California? I can't remember.
So I went out to work in San Anselmo near
Right.
San Rafael.
So when you watched that movie the first time, and did you know, or did you just think it was cool, or boy, this needs a lot of work?
He didn't show it to me. He wouldn't show me the picture.
Oh.
He said, "I don't want you to look at this cut." He says, just start fixing it. So at that point, Marsha was involved in building the end battle, which was an enormous challenge. She was working with, you know, pilots sitting in cockpits, and to represent the exterior shots, she was using black and white dogfight footage from Second World War films. So the action in the black and white may have had nothing to do with what the ILM shot that was going to replace it was going to be, but just all you knew was that it was an exterior shot. So she was piecing together this thing. It was really hard to understand, and she was lost in this rabbit hole for weeks. And Richard Chu and Richard was the other editor on the picture. He'd already started, and he and I were recutting the body of the film and sort of leapfrogging over each other. He was working on reel 1, so I went to reel 2, and then he went to reel 3, and I went to 4, sort of like that. So I said to George, "I'd like to watch." He says, No, don't watch the movie. Don't watch the movie. So every time I got a reel, I would watch that reel, and I would think, wow, you know. So, you know, as the picture goes on, I get to the reel where they're swinging across the moat in the you know, I mean, they're all these scenes that are caught in the trash masher, you know.
But you're the one that said, "Don't look at one scene or one reel. You got to look at the whole movie."
Well, it's a process. It's a process. you have to do one of the, you have to think of both. You have to think of the micro and you have to think of the macro, but you don't do it at the same time. But
That's right.
yeah. So anyway, it was very exciting. It was very exciting. And then when we finally put it all together and looked at it, it just, working on a picture, when you, I talk about this also in the book, that editing is sort of a misnomer, that, the popular conception is, oh, you just take out the bad stuff, and in a way that's true. But the trick is, how do you identify the bad stuff? And, which is the bad stuff? Michelangelo said, beauty lies in the purgation of the superfluous. So he would look at a block of stone and say, well, he would see, take away everything that doesn't look like David, So I'm not comparing myself to Michelangelo, but it's a similar process where you have to, it's not so easy to identify what you don't need, So anyway, the first part of what editors do is to build the film. So we're actually building the whole time before you start the editing. So it's editing is too sort of vague. It covers a lot of things that are not really editing. So while you're building it, you're not thinking about the editing yet.
Do you believe editors have to be really good storytellers?
I think it helps.
No, I think it's more than just helps, Paul. I think that's why when you told stories on the movie work together, I knew you were a great storyteller, and I believe you do have to be. So let me ask you a question. The first cut, did Vader die at the end in the first cut?
Well, his fate was ambiguous. There was, that famous shot of Han, the Millennium Falcon coming toward camera with the sun behind it.
Right.
And cut inside, and Han is yelling, yoo-hoo, and he blasts Vader out of the trench just before he had his chance to blow Luke out of the sky. So.
Oh, I thought there was in the script, Vader died, but you guys decided to change that.
I don't know.
It was in the book, Paul, so I don't know. Maybe I misread it.
Maybe I misremembered it. But anyway, maybe I'm misremembering it now, which is more probably the case. But George wanted to make it specific that he got away. So the last changes we made in the picture, very late in the day, were to add 2 shots, one of Vader regaining control of his ship, and the other of his ship disappearing into space.
Oh, so then, yeah, so that's basically, he wanted to make sure everybody knew that Vader was still alive. Yes. For The Empire Strikes Back, or whatever the next one was going to be.
Yes.
Now, it was done, and you have to show it to Laddie, who was head of Fox at the time, and I'm sure all the executives there. When you're sitting in a room and you're watching it, you and George and his buddies, I guess Matt Robbins and Hal Barwood and Walter Murch and all these amazing characters up there, maybe Francis.
They were busy on Apocalypse.
Okay, but did anybody, were you sitting there going, man, we've got something that nobody's ever seen before, or at least not since the 1930s?
Well, there were a number of screenings. Laddie saw it before, he saw it around Christmas, and then around February, we showed it to a bunch of George's friends, the famous director's screening, which has been much written about. And then there was a screening for the board of directors in maybe April, so it was sort of a continuing process. When Laddie saw it, it was very rough. And I wondered how how we didn't, because there were all those black and white shots in the end sequence. I thought, how's he going to make head or tail of that? Is even us working on it have trouble sort of following it, But the lights came on, and Laddie just said, "Great," and I never knew. That's
a lot for Laddie, by the way. Yeah. He probably did it like, for those who know Laddie, his hand was like this, and he just went, "Great." That's a lot for Laddie.
So I thought, is he saying great because he thought it was great, or is he saying great just because he figures in for a penny, in for a pound, and you know?
Yeah. So when the movie opened, the New York reviews were mixed at best.
Oh yeah,
Yet there were lines around the block. Why do you think I mean, we all know why now, but that experience of that opening night and lines, I mean, Westwood, there were lines all the way through Westwood, as I remember, trying to get to the theater. I think it was was it at the Village or the Bruin or one of those?
I don't know. I wasn't living in LA at the time.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So,
But how did the audience know and the critics didn't?
the critics aren't always right, you know. I mean, there's a whole book. I have a whole book of musical criticism where they panned, you know, Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, which is one of the most famous and adored pieces in classical music. You know, critics wrote about it as it's not music, it's noise, you know. So
all right. Okay, so
this
Star Wars a big hit.
Yeah.
And you get nominated for an Oscar, and also the Screen Editors Guild, you get nominated for an Eddie. And this is exciting for you. You're a New York editor, you're out here in California.
Yeah.
And tell us what happened.
Yeah, so I came out for the Eddies, and it was held at the Ambassador Hotel, the Coconut Grove. And when I thought, you know, I'll be very cool about this. I remember, by the way, I was sitting next to Quincy Jones, who couldn't have been nicer and more friendlier, and what a sweet man.
Still is.
Yeah. Anyway, he was very, very kind to me. Anyway, when the moment came and they were announcing Best Feature Film, my heart started to pound so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest, and it took me by surprise. I thought I could just, you know, keep my cool, but I was not able to keep my cool. And fortunately, the winner was Bill Reynolds for The Turning Point. And I was able to recover in anonymity in the audience. And I thought, well, you know, New York editor and the director's wife, and, you know, Richard's a San Francisco editor, and there's no way we can win, you know. And so the following week I came back for the Oscars, and I sort of expected the same thing to happen. But we were nominated.
Did you get as nervous when they announced the nominees? Was your heart still jumping?
Yeah, when it got to the Editors Award, you know, I had the same reaction, but this time it didn't take me by surprise, so it was a little less disconcerting.
But you won.
And then
it wasn't disconcerting.
So that was surprising because we were up against Walter Murch for Julia, and we were up against Michael Kahn for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and you know, some great editors. So yeah, we won, and that was a great.
Well, but you went up there. How was it decided who was going to speak?
Well, at the end of the film, it turned out that I had worked on the picture longer than anyone else. I had more months as an editor on the picture than any of the others who had worked on the film. So it was a producer's decision to put my name in first position. I had nothing to do with it, but that's what they decided. So, and I was the only editor for the last 5 months. So anyway, they put my name first. So we decided that we would speak in order of our names on the film, and they kept saying, you know, choose a spokesman. You know, everybody doesn't have to speak. You know, we're trying to save time, and so we said, well, screw that. You know, we'll all have our say. And so I went up and I spoke first, and then I turned to Marcia, who was going to go next, and she started walking off the stage, and then Richard followed her, and then the music started to play, and then that was it. So we got in the wings, and I said, "What happened?" You know, she said, "Well, just as we were getting up, George said to me, 'Don't thank me.'" she says. So and you had thanked all the people I wanted to thank anyway. So, and then Richard said, well, I saw that Marsha wasn't going to speak, so I figured I wasn't going to speak either. So that's how that happened.
And so how did that Oscar change your life and your career?
Well, I don't know.
Oh, yes, you do.
I started getting interesting offers, I mean, how can you
Get
say,
to pick and choose?
well, people have this idea that I just sit, I get all these scripts and I say, I think, let me see, will I do this one or that one? It doesn't work that way. You're working, you're freelance, you finish a job and you think, oh no, I gotta find a job, and something comes along and by and large, I would take whatever came along. Now, frequently, I would say, I don't know I never tried to analyze how much of the time, but it seems to me like all the time, I would never be offered a job. I would be offered 2 jobs. And there was always one that I preferred to the other. But it always seemed like the one that I preferred, they had another editor in mind that they preferred to me. And they're waiting to see if they could get the person they wanted. And they're holding me off as in second position. And meanwhile, I had to juggle these 2 offers and try to get the one that I wanted. Anyway, it was always very complicated. I had an agent once who, I won't mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but I can't tell you how many times he would say to me, I think I lost you both jobs.
Was that Marty?
Yes, it was.
Probably. At any rate, what was it like? How your life and your reputation just goes from, yeah, he's a good editor, he's done some good movies, to boom, why he did Star Wars, he's got an Oscar.
Yeah.
Your price increased.
Slowly, very slowly.
What about your personal life with Jane and your kids, your son and your daughter? What did they think of their dad now?
Well, they were very young at the time. They couldn't make sense of it. And, they were too young to appreciate what was going on. But what happened was, when I got to the end of Empire Strikes Back, Larry Kasdan, who had written the screenplay, was doing his first film as a director. And he offered me the film. And we'd been away from New York for a long time at that point. We were based in New York, where I had grown up.
That Big Chill?
Sorry?
Was that the Big Chill?
No, it was the one with Catherine, Body Heat.
Oh, Body Heat, right, sorry.
Body Heat was his first picture.
Right.
And I had been away from home for quite a while at that point. I think it was over a year. And I turned it down and I said, I'm going back to New York. I figured I'll go back to New York and I'm sure I'll get plenty of offers in New York. Well, it didn't happen. I went back to New York and, the film business at that point, it may have changed over the years, but I remember that whenever there was a recession in the country, the jobs dried up. It's like movies are made with discretionary money. Hey, we got some extra money, let's invest in a movie. But when there's not a lot of money floating around, the jobs tended to be fewer. That was
you mentioned Kasdan. Trivia question, don't tell us, Paul. Yeah. Trivia question for everybody out there. Why is Indiana Jones named Indiana? Why isn't he Colorado Jones or Illinois Jones? So if any of you know, you can chat me or chat to Jen.
Or you can
and later on,
you can call us,
or you can call through if you know the answer. And maybe Paul will sign a book for you if you win. And I have one other two trivia questions. Who is the voice of Yoda? So there you got 2 questions there that I'm sure Paul can answer, or I can answer, but Paul can answer. So if you know the answers, get to Jen. All right, we're going to move on now. Do you have a philosophy about creative decisions you mentioned in the book?
Well, I'm not comfortable with indecision. And here's the way I look at it. If the choices that you're presented with were vastly different, if one was clearly a much better choice than the other, you'd have no trouble making the decision. It's only when the two choices are very, very close that you have a real decision to make. But if they're that close, it really doesn't matter which one you choose because they're very close. So I'd rather choose one, and then move on. I don't like to stay in a state of indecision. Everything that editors do anyway is in the nature of a suggestion. Everything that we do is subject to the review and approval of people higher up in the hierarchy than we are. So we are in the suggestion business. This is the way I would do it. You want to make changes, fine. But so I'm comfortable making the decisions. If nobody, and my approach to cutting the scenes was always, I will cut this so that if I never get a chance to go back to it, it's perfectly presentable for the public. I'm not going to do a rough version. I'm going to do a version that I think is good enough to put in front of people. And if we never get back to the scene, it'll be fine. That was always my approach. And when you're working on film, it's much more important because it's sort of like working in fresco where the plaster hardens. You can make changes in film, but it's a lot more difficult than it is today with digital editing.
Well, but you aside from making the decisions from one or the other, they're both pretty good. You also used to use the term ipsy pipsy. What does that mean?
Well,
I like that, ipsy pipsy.
Well, that was an expression that my stepfather used. He was a working class guy who had become successful running a paint company. He had started out as a painter in the Depression, and he was grinding his own paints. And the word got around that Lenny made a very nice white paint. So other artists would come to him and say, "Hey, Lenny, could you sell me some of your paint?" And he was making more money selling paint than he was selling his paintings. So he started a paint company making paint for artists. So he was a great guy. He was my stepfather, but I started thinking of him as my bonus father. He was just a terrific human being, and I feel fortunate to have had him in my life. But how did we get onto this?
Ipsy pipsy.
Oh, ipsy pipsy. So that's an expression that he used to use. And, J.J. Abrams said to me, he says, I would use it when I didn't feel strongly one way or the other. They'd say, "What do you think? This way or that way?" And I'd go, ipsy pipsy, so.
Doesn't make any difference. We'll try one, try the other. Doesn't make any difference.
George used to say 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And I thought that was too many syllables, but it's the same idea,
Okay,
but,
so
when I was working with JJ, I said ipsy pipsy. And then about a minute later, this intern runs in with a baseball cap, and across the front, it says ipsy pipsy. He had a machine for making baseball caps in the other room, and he had texted, he said, "Bring in a hat that says ipsy pipsy on it."
boy, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So now, okay, in the old days, because I remember this, when I budgeted movies, you had 20 weeks for post.
Yeah.
In 20 weeks of post, you had to cut the film, actual film,
Yeah.
not digital. When you went into the mix room, you had rolls and rolls of sound behind you in the booth. If you made a mistake at 480 feet, you had to go back to foot one to do the whole reel.
Yeah, you're going way back now, Paul.
Well, I've been there a long time, I guess, Paul.
We're the same age. Actually, I'm a month older than you.
But 20 weeks today, forget the vis effects.
Yeah.
Today, with boom, you can, digital, look at 20 takes at once, run them back, forth, blah, blah. It takes 30, 35 weeks to cut the same thing that everybody used to do in 20. What happened?
You just answered your own question. How long does it take you to decide between blue and red?
Not very long.
Now, if you have 69 shades of blue and 69 Shades of Red, how long does it take you to decide?
Well, if you're like you make a decision, you could get it done in 20 weeks.
Yeah, but you want to consider, you want to give each, you want to do due diligence.
Okay, all right, good. All right, good answer. So
All right.
even though the technological part of editing is different than it was,
Yeah.
what advice would you give young editors coming up today with regard to what doesn't change?
And I
Well-
will have you re-ask that question in just a minute. I want to take a moment to thank Jonathan on Facebook, who wrote the answer to who voiced Yoda, which of course, those of us that know and love Star Wars, we know is Frank Oz.
Miss
Oh.
Piggy.
Well, that's right.
Very good.
Miss Piggy is the answer.
Miss Piggy. So again, I'll ask the question, even though the technological part of editing is different than it was, what advice would you give editors, young editors coming up today with regard to what doesn't change?
Well, the great thing about editing, at least in my case, for me, the lucky thing about editing is that it's not a technological art. It's the tools change, but the editing is a mental process that doesn't change no matter what tools you're using to make the choices that you are. You have to figure out where to come into a shot, how long to hold it, at what point to get out, how to make transitions, how to establish pace, how to establish clarity, how to put emphasis where it needs to be, how to make moments that are important land, how to make the pace comfortable so it's not going too fast, it's not going too slow. These are all things that have nothing to do with the tools. So if you're talking about the art of editing itself, it's independent from the computer. Nobody says that Shakespeare would have written greater plays if he had had a word processor,
Right. Right.
whatever.
Good.
But it's not writing is not about the pen, and editing is not about the editing machine.
Right. Good answer. Really good answer.
Thank you.
Now we've talked a lot about some of your hit movies.
Yeah.
What happens when an editor works on a movie that totally bombs? And I don't want to mention the name of Pluto Nash. Oh, I did it. Pluto Nash. I worked on a movie called Honky Tonk Freeway. Okay. So I understand, but what happens to an editor when he or she does a movie like that I don't know if you thought it was going to be good and it totally bombed?
Well, I read a version of the script that I thought was really funny. And I was working on a picture called Mission to Mars at the time.
With Brian De Palma.
Brian.
Yeah.
And I went off to Montreal to join Pluto Nash, which was just getting going. And I read the script again, and all the humor had been taken out of it. And I called the director and I said, Ron, it was Ron Underwood. And I said, Ron, what happened to the script? I read a funny version. This isn't funny at all. He said, well, Eddie Murphy told us he didn't want it written funny. He said, write it straight and I'll play it funny. I said, oh, okay. What do I know? Okay, maybe that'll work. Who knows? But so we started shooting, and the dailies aren't funny. And we all knew it. And we talk about it. And the producer, Martin Bregman, knew it. Lou Stroller, who was on the picture, knew it. Everybody knew it. And they'd go to Eddie and he'd say, well, what do you want me to do? And Ron would suggest something. And he'd say, I've already done that. I don't want to repeat myself. So that's how it.
So the movie comes out and bombs. Now here's an editor who was probably getting a lot of work because of winning an Oscar on Star Wars or making so many other hit movies. Now, what happens to that editor when a movie like this comes out? Do you get cold?
Yeah, it really affected me. And not only did it bomb, but I was fired from it because
Because you couldn't make it funny, probably.
I couldn't make, yeah, right. I could not make it funny. And after I was fired, they didn't even fire me. I had to fire myself, but the details of that are in the book. But after I was fired, they kept shooting they kept the picture going. They put it on hold for 6 months. They reshot after 6 months. And they finally finished the picture a year after I had been let go. And the opening weekend, it made $4 million. No, it made $2 million and topped out at 4 million. It had cost over 100. So at that point, I started to get a little leery of what picture I would accept, because if I thought the picture didn't have a chance of working, I thought I could get blamed like I did on Pluto Nash. So, you know, I had to be very careful what pictures I accepted. And I turned down a picture at Paramount because I thought it wouldn't work. And as it turned out, it didn't work. But I was out of work for a long time. But anyway, it affected me materially because my income for the 5 years after Pluto Nash was about half what it had been for the 5 years preceding Pluto. So you know, I would ask my agent, you know, what happened? He said, well, you know, I'm trying to, why won't they pay my price? And he'd say, well, you know, I asked them and they would say, well, Pluto Nash, you know, as if that was an explanation, you know.
Right. Well, so Jen has somebody else has an answer, I guess.
Yes, and I also wanted to quickly say that for me, the takeaway from that specific story is I think we tend to forget how incredibly collaborative this industry is. And it's one of the reasons that MPTF works, because the community really does understand that it is, it's a number of people filtering through a story process that certainly there are a few people at the helm of, but everyone needs to be responsible for what that is at the end of the day. So to put that all upon one person it's very unfair, Paul, and I'm sorry that that happened.
I think it's just, you know, business gamesmanship.
Yeah. So we've gotten several answers to the question about Indiana Jones.
Right.
Peter, who's on Zoom with us, says, well, of course, that was George Lucas's dog's name. Rocky and Jonathan also had the same correct answer on Facebook.
Yep.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. We've got a little more time before we get to questions. If you do have questions, hit chat or call in to Jen. But we didn't get to talk at all about Herb Ross. And I know you did a bunch of movies with Herb, one of which I actually developed at Raystar and when Herb came on. And you mentioned that he was in their book, you say he was the best director to work with actors that you ever worked with. Can you explain that?
Well, he gave a lot of attention to, and he was very sensitive to nuance in performance in a way that, you know, I hadn't really been accustomed to. I worked with Brian, you know, Brian's movies, Brian has a genius for visual storytelling. And, you know, Carrie is an example of that, but all his films have these elaborate set pieces that are constructed from fantastic camera movements and setups that are designed to go together. He can't always explain exactly how, but they work, you know. And Brian was in high school. He designed a computer from scratch, so he has the kind of brain that can put things together, and he understands cinematography and editing in a profound way and in a gifted way that's sort of underappreciated, I think. On the other hand, he's not very interested in dialogue, and he talks about movies that are dialogue heavy as talk fests, you know, and he dismisses that as not real cinema. I mean, to him, the true cinema is, you know, communicating through images, not words. So there's that. And so that doesn't put as much of a premium on his performance as you know, Herbert did. And then, of course, then I'd worked with George, And George is all about fantastic design and imagination, and and they used to joke about George teasing him on the set. They would say, the only note he ever gave to the actors was faster and more intense. So he wasn't delving into nuances of motivation and character, So when I got started, the first picture I did with Herbert was Footloose, and there was a scene in it that I thought we could move. I thought, oh, this scene, story-wise, you could take this scene and you could put it elsewhere. And then I did that. And when I did it and I looked at it in the new context, I thought, well, this doesn't work at all. And why didn't it work at all? Because of the attitude of one of the actresses in the scene. So it was like the first time I stumbled across a performance consideration that hadn't been in my earlier pictures. And I started to realize that, and then Herbert was fantastic and giving me a lot of freedom, because in those days, in the film days, you looked at dailies, and that was when you made your selections about what to use in the film. And a lot of directors would have assistant editors sit next to them, and he would dictate his choices while he's watching dailies. I like this line from this take, I like that line from that take, and so forth. And they were shooting in Utah, and I was back in LA, and I said to Herbert, and I said, you want somebody sitting next to you and note down your preferences? He said, no, that's not necessary. Just use whatever you want. He says, I have a very good memory, and if it's not in the film, I'll ask for it. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic, because he gave me so much freedom. And in fact, he was very supportive of what I've been doing. And then, but at times he would say, wasn't there a reading of this where she played it a little more suspiciously? And I looked, and yeah, sure enough, there was a take where she played it with a kind of a suspicious attitude. And so I put that in, so he was great to work with in that sense. I mean, but he delved into the subtext, much more deeply than the directors I've been working with up to that point.
Now, you worked with my old pal, because I did his first movie, The Idolmaker, Taylor Hackford, and
Yes.
You got nominated again for an Academy Award
Yeah.
and I think you won the Eddie that year.
I did.
For Ray.
Yeah.
Talk about working with Taylor, sorry, call him Tails. As a matter of fact, I remember coming into your editing room one day over at Lantana.
Yeah.
And I think you and Taylor showed me a couple of scenes.
Uh-huh.
But I guess what the question I have is, how did you get along with someone like De Palma, someone like Lucas, then there's Herb Ross, then there's Taylor, and then John Hughes, who is, I mean, all of them seem to be so different, and yet you were able to, they all wanted to work with you again, and they all felt a trust and a belief in you. What have you got, Paul? What is that?
It's because I'm so lovable.
All right, well, there's your answer, folks. There's your answer. Paul is lovable. Well, speaking of lovable, I've loved this. This has been a lot of fun for me. So I want to ask you, what's the favorite movie of yours that you've worked on?
Well, it's like, who's your favorite child?
All right, you can give me two if you want.
Only two? I've done almost 45 or something. I have a fond spot for, well, first of all, Star Wars is a special, because this, that phenomenon has spread worldwide. On Facebook, I get fans, Star Wars fans, reaching out to me from Portugal and Germany and England and Spain and Italy. And I had a Instagram interview like this with a young guy from Sri Lanka. I said to him, how many hours difference is it from LA? He said 12 and a half. I was talking to this guy like I'm talking to you, and he's halfway around the world. Think about that. It's just fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, of course, Star Wars has spread my name far and wide. So it occupies a special place for me. But I think the ones that I enjoyed the most and get a kick out of are the ones that involve music, because that was really my first love. And, you know, Phantom of the Paradise.
Footloose, and that's Ray.
Footloose and Ray, and Phantom of the Paradise has some great
Right.
musical numbers. And,
Right,
I did a picture with Jonathan Lynn called The Fighting Temptations.
right.
Gospel music with Beyonce.
Yeah.
When she was 21 years old. And
We didn't even get into, didn't have time to even talk about the Mission Impossible movies that you did.
yeah,
Tell me what's your favorite movie? Forget the ones that you did. What if you say, Jesus, you know, I got to be on a desert island and I only get to have one movie with me? What are you going to bring?
I thought about this, and it's a tricky question because I've gone back to movies that I thought were absolutely fantastic, and they didn't hold up for me. You know, so all I can say is there are movies that floored me when I saw them, but I don't know that they would have the same effect on me today.
Mm.
You know, so for instance, you know, American in Paris, I've seen that again, and it sort of leaves me cold, you know, but when I was a kid, it was
Right,
important to me.
right.
But, you know, I adore La Strada and Knights of
Zampano.
Cabiria. Yeah, and Knights of Cabiria. I mean, those pictures. I worked with Dino De Laurentiis, and in his bio that he put out, he had, you know, he won the Academy Award for La Strada and Knights of Cabiria, never mentioned Fellini.
Yeah, that's Dino. So let me ask you, for all the people who may have been interviewed and wanted to get jobs, or people out there that have wanted jobs in the industry, you have a story about when you went in to meet on the Hurt Locker, which I think is a very interesting story about what you should and maybe shouldn't say in an interview.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, I'll tell the story of the Hurt Locker. So I had this nice meeting with Catherine Bigelow and Mark Bowl, and at the end of it, she said, "Well, how do you know, how would you like to go to Jordan?" And like an idiot, I said, "In August." And I said, "Well, let me think about that," you know. And so I thought about it, and I called the next day. I said to my agent, "Tell him I'll do it. You know, love to go. Sure, I'd love to go to Jordan." And I got a call back and said they already hired somebody else. I said, "What? One day?" You know. Unfortunately, this is one of those situations where I've been offered 2 jobs. So the other job I'd been offered was a picture starring Bob De Niro and Al Pacino. And I thought, okay, great, make the deal with the other. Yeah, I'll do that one, you know. So 3 weeks later, they called back, and the Hurt Locker called back, and they said, "Is Paul still available?" And they called me and they said, "What should we say?" I said, "Tell them I'm no longer available." You know, if I had known then what I know now, I would have dumped the Pacino De Niro picture in a second. You know.
Sure.
Anyway,
That wasn't with Michael Mann, was it?
No.
No.
So the point of the story is that in a job interview, and you know, you ask advice for young people. When you're going to a job interview, never give the people you're talking to any reason at all not to hire you. Don't say anything negative. You say, "You want to go to Jordan?" "Yes, I want to go to Jordan. I wanted more to go to Jordan than anything in my life. You know, I've always wanted to go to Jordan."
Right.
Never give anybody any kind of reason not to, you know, not to hire you.
Well, Paul, this has been a lot of fun. We've got a few minutes left, and I know that our CEO of the Motion Picture and Television Fund, Bob Beecher, who used to work for Lucas, is on. There's Bob with his vote hat, and I know he's really interested in meeting you and talking to you. And Bob, have you got a question for or a comment for Paul?
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Great meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
Legend in our industry. No, I just wanted to point out, I'd like to make little connections here. The chaplain at MPTF is a gentleman by the name of Arthur Rosenberg. And you might remember him because he played Wes Warnaker in Footloose. He played Kevin Bacon's uncle in Footloose.
Boy, that's going a long way.
We could have made that a trivia question, and we'd be here until Lag BaOmer trying to get the answer to it.
That's 37 years ago. 37 years, Bob.
Yes.
I do have a question.
Still talks about it like it was
A
yesterday.
question from the audience. A woman named Molly Jordan Koch. You might know her, Paul. Hi, Paul. So nice to see you here. My question: what percentage of your work is attributable to your artistic contribution compared to something else? What is that something else? Maybe I'm asking what makes a good editor.
Timing.
What?
Timing.
Timing. That makes a good comedy. Timing. There you go, Molly.
I'm not, it's a sort of a complicated question, but I think that you have to have a good sense of rhythm and sensitivity to pace. When I'm working on a picture, it's like I'm playing a game of what's wrong with this picture. When I'm watching it, I'm opening myself up to things that annoy me or bother me. This is taking too long. This is happening too fast. This is confusing. And this doesn't have a chance to land, or so you're always looking for things that are wrong with it. And I think that you have to have a natural ability to be really good at it. And a lot of people are really good at it. It doesn't take education. It's not a question of education. It's a question of some sort of natural gift that some people have and other people don't.
Very good. We have someone from 1390 Broadcast, whatever that is. Dan on Facebook would like to know if there are fun stories. You ready? From I Love Trouble.
Well, Dan, a long time ago in a cutting room far, far away, there's a whole chapter devoted to I Love Trouble. It's one of the better chapters in the book, I think. I think it might have been the first chapter I wrote, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it was quite an adventure.
Okay, yes, I would say rather than here, read the book. There's someone for Al Kamalazad. I hope I pronounced it correctly, Al. If there's time, how does Paul think about cutting movies with a lot of effects? For example, how do you know to cut a huge effects wide during the early cuts if you've only got a green screen to work with?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges in working on those kinds of movies. And the additional challenge is not only do you have to use your imagination, but because of the scheduling requirements of the VFX houses, you have to lock those sequences very early on before you have enough context to really properly judge them and turn them over, because they take so much time to turn over those shots. So you're forced into making decisions very early on that you, like you say, you don't have really enough information to make a good decision. I tell producers and directors all the time that there's going to be a certain amount of waste when we're locking sequences early in the schedule just to satisfy the demands of the VFX houses, but that's just the nature of the beast. You just have to live with that.
Bob?
Paul, I have a question.
Yes.
Paul, I joined Lucasfilm not long after the Empire Strikes Back release. And I know you worked on that film as well. It's actually my favorite film of the Star Wars series. And you worked with Marcia on that one.
Well, Marcia came in for a day.
Oh, okay. I was just curious because not long after that film was released, their marriage kind of came to an end, and I was wondering what that editing room might have been like at that time.
Well, like I say, I was the editor on the picture, and Marcia came in for a day to work on a scene between Harrison and Carrie Fisher.
Okay.
She might have, maybe 2 days, I don't know. It was,
But there must have been some disruption at Skywalker Sound with the breakup of that marriage, I'm sure.
when I heard about it, it was like learning about my parents' divorce. I was just so unhappy to hear that. I mean, I don't know that either one ever really got over it, to tell you the truth.
Well, as I said, Paul, I had a ball today. I hope you did.
I did.
Jen, Freda, anything else that you guys want to come in and say?
Yeah, I have one last question. I had a long question. This is the quick one. I know you said tools don't matter, but do you prefer film or digital?
Well, I wrote an article for the Editor's Magazine once, and I explained that the digital editing makes the work easier, but the job harder, because it invites participation in a way that working on film didn't. But as a tool for the artist, it's fantastic. In terms of the politics of it, it complicates things.
Okay.
Jen?
When I'm choosing an editing room, Fred, I tell my assistants, I want the smallest room possible. Get the fewest people into the room.
Very smart. Well, thank you so much.
I'm so glad we got to do this, Paul, because you really are a legend in our industry, and
Thank you.
I thank you for saying yes to this, and
Honor.
I hope
It's an honor.
everybody out there reads this book because it's fascinating.
It's an honor hearing it from another legend.
Thank you.
And I just want to remind everyone that if they have any questions about Behind the Book, if they want to get a copy and have Paul sign it, go to Behind the Book at mptf.com and we'll answer your questions.
Jen?
Magic Time by Hawk Koch is also available for purchase right now on such places as Amazon.com. And of course, highly recommend get yourself a copy of A Long Time Ago in a Cutting Room Far, Far Away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay.